Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Pillcocaja wash processed Ecuador from Thankfully Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Thankfully, based out of Waverly, Alabama. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, including our recent review of the Aricha, a natural processed Ethiopian coffee. And when purchasing that coffee, I also decided to add this one alongside it, as of the two coffees, this is actually the one that I was more interested in, largely because this is of course a Mejorado that we've actually never reviewed from any coffee roaster up to this point. So when I saw it and saw its description, it sounded very much like my type of coffee, so we decided to pick it up, and it'll be interesting to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 50. And the recipe we went with for this coffee was a higher extraction one at a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which usually indicates a more medium fine grind. However, we also went a little bit more fine on that grind as well. Now, roast profile of this one, as mentioned in the previous review, this one is the extra light offering that we are reviewing from them. And this one is on the other side of the spectrum, as it's actually one of the lightest roasted coffees that we have had from Thankfully as well. I would say that if it's not on par with the Finca Velez that we had reviewed earlier this year, it's actually probably a little lighter than that one. I can see some comparisons to even the light profile offerings from H&S that we have reviewed in the past, as this one definitely did offer some of those very light qualities to it as well. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 21 through the V60, and as mentioned, the coffees definitely had some similarities to the Finca Velez, as it had a slightly sweet cracker feel, as it definitely felt like this coffee probably needed even more time to open up, as it does improve on the back end with some hidden sweetness in the cool down, but for the most part it was a decent start. And that's kind of what I'm alluding to when it comes to the profile of this coffee, as when it comes to Thankfully's extra light, they're not necessarily always to the same extent as a lot of the more modern roasters that are synonymous with some extremely light roasted coffees. But even then, this one did seem to jump out largely because it had that slightly sort of, I want to say, cracker characteristic, which is pretty indicative of some very light profiled coffees. So I was definitely wondering if this coffee would probably need significantly more time, and I do believe, if I remember correctly, they said that this one only needed about 3 to 5 weeks worth of rest, and that's why we started at this day 21 mark, but I definitely felt like more time was needed with it. Day 24 through the Chemex, and the coffee was a little better, as there's a little bit of that sweet cracker quality to it, but it does offer a little bit more of the illicit peach, a little bit more of the apple qualities, and a more prominent fruit sugar quality as well. It feels like it's already starting to open up, as it's best around room temperature, but even then it definitely felt like more time was needed within this one. Day 27 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee has been pretty consistent so far. However, there is a slight bit more of that sweet cracker characteristic, but also a little bit of a nutty quality off brew, more of those lighter profiled characteristics of this one. It continues to open up as it cools down with a increasing peach quality and sugary quality as well. It honestly just felt like this was a waiting game, and it needed even more time for this coffee to really open up. Day 30 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments, and largely the reason we went with the lower extraction adjustments is because, probably most specifically with Pepe's Mejorado coffees, we usually have the best results going lower on the extraction with his coffees, and that does usually translate to more of the Mejorados that we review. So that's why we opted to go this direction first. We were definitely going to play around with it in both directions, and it did feel a little improved, as it has cleared up some of the cracker and peanut qualities, allowing for a slightly more clear presentation of the fruits, especially in the illicit apple-like sense. And I really enjoyed the way the apple characteristic presented itself on this day. It was pretty well defined. I remember thinking about this coffee as being a bit more apple forward than I was probably expecting. If I remember correctly, I think they have something along the lines of a yellow apple, and just kind of a fun fact, my favorite apple is the opal apple, and I can definitely see that in this one because it had a lot of those more sugary apple-like characteristics to it. And the reason I love opal apples is because they're hyper sweet if you get a really good one. So that's what this coffee reminded me of, and I was very happy with that on this day. Feels like the coffee is once again just naturally opening up with time, so it's better. I didn't necessarily feel the adjustments were what made this coffee better. I just felt like it was more time that was making this one improve. Day 34 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and there's more of a similar sentiment this time around as the coffee does feel like it's naturally opening up with less of the less than desirable light profiled qualities of this one and better sweetness and definition. I do wonder if people actually like those characteristics. I know it's a little bit of a meme that everyone's looking for wheatgrass and hay, but I don't know if anybody actually likes those or if it's the weight and the coffee improving that is what people actually like about those coffees. Nonetheless, still mostly palm fruit sugar sweetness with more of the defined soft yellow peach feel, so improving. And going into this coffee, I mentioned it very much sounded like my type of coffee. Everything on the description of this coffee is stuff that I enjoy significantly, especially within coffee. So having these qualities become a bit more abundant with time was definitely improving my overall sentiment towards it. Day 38 through the V60 with higher extraction adjustments, so 17-1 at 99 degrees Celsius and a more fine grind, and the coffee was the best it had been to this point as it's bringing out the most intensity, giving it a little bit more of a peach pie feel with a sugary crust-like quality and characteristic to it. I feel like that's some Mejorado qualities and characteristics. They do have that butterscotch note listed on here, which I was very intrigued to see how it might translate within this coffee. I fully expected it to have maybe a little bit of that brown candy characteristic that I've described a lot of Mejorado coffees as offering in the past. This time it was just a little bit more of kind of a brown sugar pie crust-like feel to it, which I very much enjoyed the way that it translated in this experience as well. Brighter as well with more florals in the finish too, so better again. And on day 41 we opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments. And there was a pretty similar sentiment to the previous day as the coffee has either improved significantly with time or it does greatly benefit from the higher extraction adjustments. I feel like honestly it's a combination of both, and that's the reason why we've had significantly better results on these later days as the coffee is also sweeter and cleaner today. Finally, a little bit more listed butterscotch. This is the first time I could say that I was experiencing that quality, as that has also improved with time. And on day 44, we opted for the V60 with those higher extraction adjustments, and the coffee does continue to improve as it's the cleanest, sweetest, and most intense it has been to this point, with a better definition to the apple-like characteristic once again. Softer, but still pretty notable peach quality to it, and a slight citric grain, but also a nice candied finish to it as well. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. Let's go through those, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. I don't think we've scored many, if any, Mejorados higher than that level 4. As I'm kind of looking at this though, it's very clean for a Mejorado coffee, which is saying a lot. They usually do score at that level 4 mark, if maybe a rare exception to a level 3 or level 5, but I would say that probably 95+% of them have scored at the level 4 mark. And when comparing it alongside those, this one is on the higher side of that cleanliness as well. So very clean coffee, terrific definition to it. Very, very happy with the apple-like characteristic. I've complained in the past that usually when I see apple notes on a coffee, it's largely in reference to the acidity or brightness that it does present. But in this one, it did have a very sugary apple-like characteristic that I continue to describe as being reminiscent of opal apples, my favorite type of apple, the yellow apple that's on here. Finish, level 4. Very happy with the finish. No complaints in that, especially given that it did come in a candied, sugary, a lot of sugary qualities as well. So really happy with that characteristic of this coffee. Sweetness, level 4. If a Mejorado coffee isn't scoring a minimum level 4 for sweetness, then I'm definitely going to have a fair bit of disappointment with the coffee. But this one right here, very sweet, presented in a number of ways. The fruit characteristics did have some really nice sweetness to it, but it also did have that classic Mejorado sugary sweetness in both the kind of candied sense and also the sugary sense. So very happy with that scoring there at that level 4 mark. Florality, level 4. I think it's worth discussing probably a little bit more than I have as of this moment, as it's a slightly more generic white flower characteristic to it. There's a honeyed characteristic, which I can kind of also throw in there, a little bit of that honeysuckle-like component. I feel like the fruit characteristics, for me at least, were a little bit more abundant, but what I had heard from Alex from Thankfully was that the florality really seems to shine in this coffee more in the extra light profile, and the fruits do seem to shine a bit more in the standard profile. We'll get into that a little bit later, but for me, there's enough florality in this to put it at that level 4 mark, but it was still a tertiary characteristic throughout the entirety of this coffee, maybe even kind of fourth characteristic after those candied qualities as well. Citrus fruit, level 4, that's the apple-like characteristic. Really love how well-defined it is in this coffee. As mentioned, there aren't a lot of apple-like characteristics that are this well-defined and pronounced, as it's not just a generic apple-like brightness, but an actual feel of a sugary apple to it. Stone fruit, level 4, not quite as abundant as the citric fruit characteristics to it, but at times it was the more prominent characteristic within the finish. So for that reason, I could justify putting there at that level 4. I do wonder if maybe in the standard profile it was a little bit more abundant than it was in the extra light. All right, and then we have a couple of level 3s. We will start with the acidity level 3. While I mentioned that it is slightly brighter on certain days and at certain times, it still is a Mejorado coffee which fluctuates between the 3 and the 4 mark. I think it's a slightly more subdued, but still prominent brightness to justify it being there at that level 3, slightly plus on that level 3 mark. Caramel level 3, they have that butterscotch note list on there. Again, brown sugar is something I can also see. It's very sugary regardless of how you spin it, but it's justified enough to put that a little higher, and something that I definitely wanted to notate within this tasting wheel. And then looks like final thing we're discussing, body level 2, and same thing when it comes to Mejorado coffees. They do fluctuate for us usually between the 2 and the 3, so a little bit more light medium to medium bodied, but this one right here, I feel like that's probably a component of the profile of this one being a little lighter, translating to this one being a little bit lighter bodied in general. Level 2, where we opted to put that. Outside of that though, as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I briefly mentioned that I also had a quick conversation with Alex of Thankfully about this one, and they mentioned that they felt like I probably would have enjoyed the standard profile of this coffee a little bit more, and I can see that. I feel like this is a great example of what September says in the description of all of their extra light offerings, where it's for somebody that will be rewarded for their patience, as this coffee has improved greatly towards the end, and it is continuing to improve, as this is the best representation I've had of this coffee as of this moment. So for somebody that does have patience for these extra light coffees and is pretty good at working through them, then I feel like your patience will be greatly rewarded within this coffee. But I feel like if we would have gone with the standard profile, we would have been rewarded sooner, and that might have translated into more sweetness and a greater focus on the fruit intensity to it as well, maybe even the sugary and candied intensity of this coffee as well. But I still appreciated this coffee for what it was. If anything, it's definitely on the better end of coffees that I've had from Thankfully, just in general, as the Pepe Nimpula is still my favorite coffee that we've ever reviewed from them. Still one of my favorite coffees this year, but this one's very solid for a Mejorado, and as somebody that's a very big fan of Mejorado coffees, and I know Alex is also a big fan of Mejorado coffees, then I just have to say, job well done on this one. Really enjoyed the peach characteristics, the candied characteristics, but most specifically, I really want to highlight and emphasize that apple-like quality to it because of just how much I enjoyed that characteristic in comparison to other coffees that have that same sort of quality. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, definitely have to start with the profile. Pretty light, not necessarily the lightest coffee in the world, but definitely very light for their standards. And in addition to that, it's something that does require a bit of patience and a bit of tinkering, but you will be rewarded with this coffee offering some excellent sweetness, some excellent clarity, definitely on the more clean side of things. The big 4 characteristics that I look for: wonderful fruit qualities and plenty of florality as well to give this one all of those characteristics. Kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Pillcocaja wash processed Ecuador from Thankfully Coffee. Thank you for watching.